All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here tonight. Welcome to the CIC. My name is Mitch Boersma. I'm the Director of Operations here, and we're so grateful to have all of you here tonight in person and also to a big group joining us by live stream. Our event tonight is co-hosted by the Ethics and Public Policy Center and the Napa Institute. These are two organizations that are old friends of us here at the CIC. Fran and George are, of course, both fellows at EPPC, which is really taking leaping from success to success under the leadership of Ryan Anderson and Mitch Muncy. Ryan's out of town tonight, but we have Mitch Muncy here joining us. And of course, many of you are familiar with the great work that the Napa Institute is doing around the country, including co-hosting these quarterly events here at the CIC over the last few years. But not all of you have had the chance to meet the new sheriff in town. Mark Relena, who took the reins as the executive director of the Napa Institute earlier this year. He and Danielle and their family are based here in Virginia and DC. He's a good friend, an even better man. I can't imagine anyone better suited for this role. So allow me to hand over the stage just for a minute to Mark so he can introduce himself and say a little bit more about Napa.
Thanks so much, Mitch. Good evening to everyone. It's truly a blessing to be here as Fran launches True Confessions. The Napa Institute is really honored to co-host this with CIC and EPPC, great old friends of Napa. As most of you know, the Napa Institute is dedicated to empowering Catholic leaders to renew the church and to transform the culture. Our work is built upon the pillars of formation, liturgy, and community. In many ways, we view ourselves as an apostolate to other apostolates, as we find ways to connect them and to amplify their work. It's exciting to have established our DC office last month and to begin expanding our efforts, especially with such good friends. Now, you should know that for many years, Fran Maier has been a force in helping Napa to find its footing and to chart its course. We're incredibly grateful for all that Fran has done and continues to do to support our mission and direction through his role on the board, in the way that he's found just amazing speakers to populate the main stage in our conferences and in so many other ways. But I'm most honored to be here as a friend of Fran and Sue Ann's for the last 15 years. We've worked together on diocesan and lay apostolate efforts. We've strategized and connected on initiatives at the national level for the church. And he's been one of the most trusted voices in my family's discernments over big career changes throughout the years. Fran's unwavering style of true friendship is an honest reflection of who he is at his core. He's a careful listener and a clear and sober communicator of the truths his friends need to hear. He's fiercely loyal, always willing to support and encourage the call of others, and he often knows those calls better than we do. He's a man with a well-developed sense of justice, particularly for those not in a position to speak for themselves. He sees what needs to be done or said and finds a way to give that need a voice, as only he can. But of course, his friendship is based on real love, which finds its source in the love of Jesus Christ and his church. And so it should be no surprise that True Confessions reveals, in a major way, the heart of its author. Fran has carefully listened to write this great book, and not just to one kind of storyteller. His fierce loyalty to the church and those who give their lives to her work, along with his love for what the body of Christ is meant to be in the world, are carefully mixed with his vast experience to give us, again, a clear and sober message. Fran has given voice to the need before us in the moment that we are given. He continues to be one of the great communicators in the church. And thank you, Fran, for all your work on this book. It's great to be with you here tonight, and I hope many people buy it and learn from its wisdom.
So do I.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Okay, this is how we're going to proceed tonight. First, I'll invite Fran to the podium to deliver some remarks about this beautiful new book, True Confessions, Voices of Faith from a Life in the Church. Now, the room is full tonight because most of you already know Fran in one way or another, but I will state for the record here that Fran is a senior fellow in the Catholic Studies program at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and a board member of the Napa Institute. He served for 23 years as a senior aide to Archbishop Charles Chaput in Denver and Philadelphia. Prior to that, he served as editor-in-chief of the National Catholic Register News Weekly, and earlier still as a screenwriter and story analyst based in Los Angeles. Fran's remarks will be followed by George Weigel, Distinguished Senior Fellow in William E. Simon Chair in Catholic Studies at EPPC. And then they'll both come up to the table here for a hearty round of Q&A, followed by a reception and a book signing out in the store. But before I bring Fran up, I just want to take the host's prerogative and tell a brief story about the first time I met Fran, which was now over 20 years ago, back in Colorado. And I know what you're thinking. I'm so spry and youthful now that I must have been but a child back when I met Fran 20 years ago, and I was, for the most part. I grew up in the suburbs of Denver and was one of the many beneficiaries of the incredible burst of new Catholic energy and apostolates that exploded on the scene in Colorado back in '93 after the wake of World Youth Day, and then shepherded under the leadership of Archbishop Chaput. By 2003, I was getting ready to graduate high school and thinking through potential career paths. The idea of working for the church in some capacity was in the mix. And my parents were longtime family friends with Dave and Joni Holden. Dave was, at the time, the CFO of the Archdiocese of Denver, and later went on to do the same job in Philadelphia. I know Dave here also because he's featured by Fran in the book here in True Confessions. It's one of my favorite little parts of the book, not only because I know Dave, but it really is an inside look at the supreme level of skill, professionalism, and virtue that it takes from talented laymen like Dave to make an archdiocese function on a practical level. Anyhow, Dave offered to introduce me to a few people he knew who had made a career out of working for the church so I could get a glimpse, and Fran must have lost a bet or something to Dave because he agreed to meet a snot-nosed kid like me at his office in the Chancery. Now, I wish I could say I remember any specific advice that Fran gave me that day. He's given a lot of counsel to many of us in the room in the 20 years since, but I can't remember anything you told me that day, Fran. And it's not because you didn't. Yeah, it's not because you didn't provide it. I'm sure you did. I just wasn't mature enough to take it in. I do have a faint memory of his office. If memory serves, it was kind of filled with tchotchkes like mine over there. But what stuck with me from that day, and still does, was the witness of a brilliant, kind, humble, talented man who has given his professional life in service of the church. I left knowing it could be done and thinking that maybe I could do it too. So now, 20 years later, to be the continued beneficiary of Fran's mentorship and friendship, to have the privilege of being interviewed by him for the book, to have the opportunity to host a book launch here at the CIC, it's all just an immense honor, Fran, and a full circle moment for me, so thank you. And thank you for writing this beautiful book, True Confessions. This book is the most special type of gift we can receive as a church because it's a gift that only you could have given, no one else. Only Fran has 5 decades of service to the church at the highest levels of leadership, from the Colorado River to the Tiber and back again. Only Fran has the quality, quantity, and depths of friendships with bishops, priests, laymen, and women spanning the whole life of the church in America that make up the 103 interviews featured in this book. Only Fran has Sue Ann, who we all know is a true secret to his success. And only Fran could put it all together in a way that makes sense and make us all sound smarter than we are. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming a true mensch of the First Order, Fran Maier.
I have to say, I'd very much like to meet the guy that these fellows have described. I have a quick story before we get going about the Napa Institute, which I very much respect. The last time I gave a main stage talk at Napa, I was getting ready to go on stage, and one of the major donors to Napa stopped by and said, "Fran, I just wanted to encourage you, don't screw this up." You know, so I've been hearing that for the last couple of hours from Sue in a very much sweeter way. So anyway, look, I'm 75 now, and 75 gives you license to make all sorts of miracle excuses about why you can't be as brilliant as you want to be, and why you're going to have to read this talk rather than extemporaneously give it. So I hope you'll forgive me if I rely on my prepared text a little bit too much, because I'm 75, okay? And we'll get to the really important stuff, some really brilliant comments from George in a couple of minutes. And then the really cool stuff about this evening is the Q&A. It always is. That was what Archbishop Chaput always used to say. Number one, don't give me a talk that's more than 30 minutes long because I start to bore myself. Number two, the Q&A is where things really get interesting because you actually interact with people, okay? So with that, I'm a big fan of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He's been a big impact on my life, my adult life, since encountering his work more than, 40 years ago. In one of his prison letters, Bonhoeffer, the Lutheran pastor and theologian, wrote that it's only with gratitude that life becomes rich. I believe that's true, so I need to thank a few people before getting into my remarks tonight. And I'll start with all of you. It's a miserable night out, and your time is precious, and once used, we can never get it back. So thank you for investing some of your time tonight to be here, and also those who signed in from a distance. I also need to thank my wife, Sue Ann, who's here with us this evening. The love that she's brought to our family life to her pro-life work and Special Olympics work over the decades, and to her 40 years of teaching in Catholic education has been extraordinary. And that's exactly the kind of unselfish devotion that I looked for in the persons from all sorts of different backgrounds that I interviewed for the book. The people behind this event tonight are another perfect example of those qualities because they have the same kind of fidelity and zeal. The work of the Catholic Information Center, and especially its leaders, Father Terlois and Mitch Buersma, is just outstanding. The same applies to Mark Rolina at the Napa Institute, and Ryan Anderson and Mitch Muncy at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, who very generously co-sponsors tonight's session. You know, one of the things I believe very strongly is that men learn how to love first from their mothers and then from their wives. But men are made better men by other better men. And that's been very much the story of my life, and particularly the guys in this room. I mean, it's just been a tremendous experience of friendship, and that's what Christianity is, that kind of community of friends that support one another. Finally, I owe a huge debt of gratitude, and one that I can't repay, to Steve and Tim Bush and to other good friends for their generosity and support as I worked on the book. And of course, I need to thank my friend George Weigel for being my respondent tonight. George and I have been friends for 45 years, which is a bit scary. And he's literally one of the premier intellectuals of my generation. Okay, so over the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'd like to do two very simple things. I want to share some general thoughts about True Confessions, why I wrote it, how I wrote it, and why I hope you'll read it. And then I'll offer a few words about our current situation in the life of the Church, especially in the United States, but also in the context of Rome and its ambiguities. Simply put, I wrote the book because I could. I worked in and around the Church for 45 years, 23 years of them as senior aide to an exceptional man and bishop, great bishop. And when you do that, you see and experience a lot of stuff that people on the outside of the church structures never see and often don't understand. The church may be the bride of Christ, but she's populated and led by human beings, and our species has a healthy number of screw-ups, if you haven't already noticed. Some of them get ordained. So I saw failures in the church firsthand. I dealt with the human, legal, and political fallout of the sex abuse scandal for 18 years as part of my duties. But more frequently, and I mean much more frequently, I saw the integrity, the self-sacrifice, and the fellowship of the priests and people I worked alongside. And I think when you've lived through those things, you have an obligation to share what you've learned so that other younger Catholics can integrate or discard those lessons from or into their Christian lives. I suppose the main lesson is this: I've never lost confidence in the church. Never. Not for a moment. I love the church more today than when I started. I admire her bishops and priests more today than I did half a century ago, because I saw the character and endurance that their work demands up close and very personally. They're overwhelmingly good men. And I hope the book communicates the depth of the commitment that their vocations require. Now, having said all of the above, fidelity and stupidity are two different things. A faithful life in the church is a lot like a long and successful marriage. The framework is love, but the candor can get pretty blunt, pretty rough. And True Confessions has a boatload of candor about what's right and wrong in the church. The title True Confessions comes from the 1981 film and crime novel of the same name. The film is actually better than the novel, and it's one of my 2 or 3 favorite movies. The reason is simple. On the surface, the story takes a very skeptical view of the church, and skeptical is a kinder word than cynical, which is really what I meant. At the peak of the church at the peak of her cultural influence and political connections in the 1940s. But that's on the surface. In the end, the story is really about humility, forgiveness, and the reconciliation of two brothers. So it's finally and very profoundly a Catholic movie. I also had Augustine's Confessions bouncing around in my head as I wrote, because like Augustine, we confess our sins, but we also confess our faith. Baptism makes all of us confessors of Jesus Christ, confessors of his church and her teachings. The central question of a Catholic life is whether we're true to what we claim to believe, or if we're lying to ourselves and everybody else when we call ourselves Catholic. That kind of self-absolving duplicity is a useful narcotic for the conscience, and there's plenty of it here in Washington and all across the country. But God isn't fooled. True confessions means that every one of the men and women I interviewed for it believes and actually lives what the church teaches, or at least sincerely tries to live those teachings, often at great personal cost. In other words, they don't lie when they pray. Which brings me to the book's methodology. You know, at first I thought I'd write the Maier grand analysis of the church in the United States, but others like George have already done that very well, and I look pretty stupid trying to compete with him. Plus, I already publish a lot of my thoughts. My EPPC colleague, Steve White, in the meantime, has already done a terrific professional study of U.S. Catholic priests, and I reference it in True Confessions. So it made no sense to me to replicate his kind of good work. And frankly, I've always felt that the tools of social science are both a very useful and very treacherous way to go. Unless those tools are in the right hands, they always run the risk of reducing human individuals and their feelings and thoughts to impersonal data points. We're subjects, we're not objects. So I settled on a mix of personal commentary and extended, in-depth interviews, 103 of them over a 17-month period. Interviews with bishops, clergy and religious, and lay people across the country. And the bishops were from 25 different states and one foreign country. I avoided voices on both extremes of the church spectrum and focused instead on committed, faithful Catholics. The tepid, the dissenters, and the chronic complainers already get plenty of media attention. They don't need mine. I wanted to know what faithful people think, why they love and stay in the church at a time of external hostility and considerable internal confusion. And I think True Confessions delivers on that. So the key question here is, why should you bother reading it? Well, let me put it this way. We live in a pivotal time because we're in the middle of a new reformation, literally a reformation, or deep restructuring of the way we think about the world, its organization, and ourselves. In other words, what it means to be human. The key social, cultural, and political issues of our day are all anthropological. And Psalm 8 asks exactly the right fundamental question. Who is man that God, assuming a God exists, would care for him? In other words, is there anything special or transcendent at all about us as human animals beyond our ability to think ourselves into one crisis after another? Is our dignity anything more than a self-flattering legal convention? In the real world, we're never as smart as we think we are. So again and again, the blowback from our mistakes is always an enormous surprise. The printing press was invented, in part, to form lay people more deeply in their Catholic faith. It ended up driving more than a century of religious and political turmoil. The birth control pill was designed specifically to strengthen marriages by giving couples the power to space the birth of their children. What we've got today is sexual carnage. And AI, for all of its positive potential, is being pushed with the same brain-dead boosterism and lack of foresight. Without God, humanity is not much more than a sorcerer's apprentice, and the magic we play with can have very unhappy results. The fact is that God's authority ensures human freedom. Tocqueville wrote that, and I'm quoting here, "If faith be absent in a man, then he must serve, and if he seeks to be free, he must believe." Put simply, no God, no freedom. Life abhors a vacuum. When God leaves the stage, the state inevitably expands to take his place. Without the biblical God, we inevitably end up with some disguised form of idolatry. And it usually involves politics for a very good reason. Politics is about getting and applying power. This is why any discord that enfeebles the Catholic community and its witness from within is so corrosive, not just for the Church, but also for a culture of true freedom. To his credit, Pope Francis has championed some very important elements of Catholic teaching. His commitment to the poor is beyond question, and we should pray for him, and not just pray for him formally, but pray for him with our hearts sincerely, because he needs those prayers, because he has an enormously important job as the Pope. But frankly, his criticism of the American church leadership and the nature of Catholic life in this country is not merely unwarranted. It's unjust and hurtful, and at times it seems both ill-informed and ill-motivated. And the irony is that his criticism, and the criticism that comes from his entourage too frequently, actually weaken the Catholic witness in this country at a time when that witness is urgently needed. So again, why bother reading True Confessions? Well, I suggest read it to learn what faithful American bishops and priests, deacons and religious and lay people actually think, not what others think they think or claim they think. Because that kind of misrepresentation is dishonest. And there's no real love in the church or anywhere else without a devotion to the truth. The truth makes us free to change and become what God intended us to be. The truth in True Confessions is the candor of faithful laypeople, Catholic laypeople, who name the real problems we face inside and outside the church. But the bigger truth, the redeeming truth in its pages, the reason I can step away from it now with some gratitude and offer it to you, is the fidelity, the energy, and the hope I found in so many of the persons I interviewed. The believing church is filled with people of hope because God is good and he doesn't abandon us. And I think True Confessions witnesses to that. Now, I began these remarks with a line from Dietrich Bonhoeffer, so I want to end with him because there's a delicious irony in suggesting a Protestant patron for our Catholic moment. That's exactly what I'm going to do. Bonhoeffer used Catholic monasteries for his personal retreats on several occasions, and when he spoke of the Catholic Church, he described himself as, and I'm quoting here, a friendly critic and critical friend. He's important for us tonight because he co-founded the confessing church movement in Germany at a time when many Christians in the Protestant tradition and Germany's mainline Lutheran Church were willfully, eagerly submitting themselves to a murderous state and grafting its doctrines onto the gospel. The confessing church refused to do that. And its pastors and members paid the price, but they remained true to the Word of God. Now, obviously, we're a very long way from Germany in the 1930s. Our circumstances are dramatically different. But the obligation and the privilege of our baptism are exactly the same. We're all called to be confessors of Jesus Christ, confessors of his church and her teachings. Jesus said the truth will make us free. He didn't say anything about it making us happy or convenient or comfortable, and it's often none of those things. But when our confessions are true, when they come from our heart and reshape the course of our life and the focus of our loves, then we can call ourselves Christian. Thanks for listening.
Good evening, everyone present here and on the Zoom. As Fran mentioned, we've known each other for quite a long time, over 40 years. And it was about 40-some years ago that Fran Maier helped launch me as a columnist in the Catholic press. 2,000 or so columns later, there are people who would like to honor that launch by hanging him by his thumbs over a slow fire and roasting him to death. But I remain very, very grateful for him recognizing in me someone who just might have something to say. I also admire Fran because, as he indicated, but also as Mitch Boersma said so beautifully, for over 2.5 decades, he subordinated his own gifts and talents and voice, to some extent, to the service of others. And I think it's just wonderful that now he has his own voice with which to speak. And I'm sure we will all benefit from that. Now, on the front of the book, my friend Cardinal Dolan of New York says that this book is a terrific snapshot of the church in the U.S. And take the book as a whole, and that's a reasonable description. But in fact, if you dig into True Confessions, it really is an in-depth exploration of the state of Catholicism in America. At a time when so much of the Catholic conversation, like so much of the national political conversation, is carried on in snarky sound bites, who's got the whip hand on the tweet, or X, or whatever one calls those things these days. By the way, if any of you ever hear that I have sent a tweet, you may know that I have been captured by the Chinese and I am being held in a dungeon somewhere. This book is an adult conversation. It's an invitation into an adult conversation. One of my literary oddities is I love collections of letters. And I regret the fact that my grandchildren are never going to have the pleasure of reading those unless they're letters of people that were written 100 years ago, because nobody writes letters anymore. This is something like an invitation into letters between Fran and his various correspondents. And what is important as well about what Fran has drawn out of these 103 interviews is that it gives us a sense of something that is often ignored in the current ecclesiastical turbulence. And that is all the good things that are going on in the church in the United States. In my column next week, I am suggesting that people give up bad news mongering for Lent and focus a bit on the good stuff. Let me just draw out a few of the good things that Fran and his interlocutors discuss in this book. First, seminaries. You will never hear this in the Catholic discussion today, except perhaps here. Our seminaries are in the best shape they have ever been, ever, in 220 some years, ever. Catholic colleges and universities. Some of them are a mess, don't really merit the name Catholic. One of them might even be rather near to where we are tonight, heading west out K Street, in case you missed the point. In others, there's a continual battle to maintain Catholic identity and an identifiably Catholic mode of life on campus. But there are so many good Catholic colleges and universities around today. Some of them also near here, others spread out across the country. And that's something to be grateful for. Also, in terms of young adult formation, we are living in a kind of golden age of Catholic campus ministry in the United States, and in some very surprising places. I may have said this at CIC before, I've certainly said it elsewhere. The gold standard for Catholic campus ministry in the United States is, of all places, at Texas A&M University, which is right in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And they've just built a new 1,800-seat church to accommodate their Sunday flow. There have been more religious vocations and priestly vocations out of A&M than out of Notre Dame in the last 25 years. The number of wonderful Catholic marriages and families that have come out of that is literally incalculable, and so forth and so on. Then we have things like Focus, another direct product of World Youth Day, Denver, 1993. Focus is now involved on 202 campuses in 6 countries, sending 980 young missionaries out to do peer-to-peer evangelization. There's nothing like this anywhere else in the world church. Bishops from around the world come to the U.S. to see how you do this stuff. That's worth lifting up. And then here in Washington, of course, we have the extraordinary Thomistic Institute run by the Dominican House of Studies, which is challenging wokery on the wokest of woke campuses around the country with the light of Catholic truth. Adult catechesis and formation. Let's just start right here. There's nothing like this place anywhere else. There's nothing like it. It's a model for how you do an in-town adult program of spiritual formation, liturgical celebration, intellectual formation, and fellowship. That's something that Father Charles and Mitch and everybody else involved here, Cindy, I know you're looking at me out the corner of your eye, waiting for me to mention you here, can be very, very proud of. And that's just one of a number of these initiatives. Another one out of World Youth Day 1993, the Augustine Institute in Denver, and its Formed program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And then we have Napa Institute, Legatus, and all the rest of it. Finally, I would mention, because this does come out in the book, that parishes and Catholic schools remain the bedrock, the pastoral bedrock of the church in the United States, as they've been since the days of John Carroll. And while many of them are struggling, they are in considerably better shape than what you would find in virtually every other country in the North Atlantic world. And our inner urban Catholic schools remain not only the best anti-poverty program that the Catholic Church has ever come up with, they're the best anti-poverty program in the country, period, right now. So to draw out all of this, the good stuff, is one of the signal contributions of this book. It's not sugar-coated. Fran knows as well as anybody that there are toxic waste dumps, or I think nuclear waste dumps, as you once described them to me, in various parts of the church that need to be cleaned up, and are being cleaned up. It's not a sugar-coated picture, but it reminds me a bit of an image that I've been commending to audiences for some years now, specifically for the past 10 years. And I note that while there are entire libraries of books of church history, there is only one divinely inspired book of church history. It's called the Acts of the Apostles. How does the Acts of the Apostles end? It ends with a shipwreck. And the shipwreck becomes the occasion to extend the mission of the church and to preach the gospel where it had never been heard before. That's not just something that happened to St. Paul and his jailers in the Eastern Med 2,000 years ago. I think that's a permanent image for the state of the church throughout history. And if we keep in mind that the shipwrecks, or what seem to be the shipwrecks, can be the occasion for extending the mission, then we will do our duty in whatever time and place we find ourselves. Thank you.
We've got plenty of time for Q&A here, so I'll invite Colleen's back there with the microphone.
This is like
Excellent. Excellent.
Hollywood Square
Q&A.
or something.
Go ahead, Colleen.
Good evening. Thank you very much. I was really impressed with the reference to candor that's really necessary in the church. I think we all agree on that, but it raises a serious conundrum, which is when we are in a church that's built on authority, rightly so, we will frequently find ourselves in a position where we have to balance candor against obedience. How do you do that? How do you do both of those things without slighting either one?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that. I think the temptation is always to let our egos and our anger get the better of us, and we can't allow that. You're speaking to someone who deals with that all the time. I'm angry a lot of the time, and it's not very productive, is it? But I think you just have to do your best to be motivated by love, but not be stupid about it. I frequently use the example of a successful long-term marriage, having had one. Having one, not having had one. I'll hear about that later. Yeah, but no, I mean, a marriage is mutual obedience. I have obligations to her, and she has obligations to me, and obviously we're two very strong personalities, and we disagree. And male headship in a Christian marriage means I get to do what she tells me to do, basically. So you just have to you have to leaven your criticism with prudence and love, but you can't suppress it. That's why I said what I said about the Holy Father tonight. I genuinely respect him, and there are mornings when I don't like praying for him, but I do. I want him to succeed. But I'm not going to be stupid about it. There's serious issues that he's raised that I think we need to talk about. I just have to stop myself from being, I'm right and he's wrong, and I'm going to get him for it, which is the instinct that exactly what George talked about in terms of, X and social media. It's just get you angry all the time. I stopped, or I can't even watch Fox very much anymore, and I tend to prefer Fox. Because I don't want to be angry all the time. I have a very hard time controlling it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think you just have to try your best to balance your legitimate anger with prudence in terms of timing and concern for the other person. And if you do that to the best of your ability, hey, you're off the hook, because God's not going to come after you for doing the very best that you can. That's how I'd answer that anyway. George probably has a club that he has hidden somewhere.
It's the 800-word club.
Thank you. Well, I have kind of a special interest in this question, but because I'm working in church management programs that I'm directing at Catholic University. But you also mentioned historically the United States, the situation of the church, maybe back in the 1940s. And there's a history in the church in the United States of, I think, a kind of activist pastor of a parish, all bricks and mortar kind of pastor. In contrast to that, we have like the St. John Vianney kind of model of a pastor who is in the confessional and praying and fighting the devil all the time. Mm-hmm. You have both remarked about the institutions of the church that are functioning on full cylinders today in the United States. Could you comment upon what you have seen and observed as a kind of integration of that doesn't fall, that is somewhere in the middle, where you have at once devotion and reverence for the sacraments and personal piety, and also a kind of effective organization in the parish that reflects this American spirit that I think you've both pointed to?
I can answer this first, or you want to
Yeah,
take
you
it?
go ahead.
Yeah, I think Catholic Leadership Institute exists in order to help priests do a better job in their management skills and develop their leadership skills. That's one of the programs that I profile. I mean, I did Napa Legal, for example. I did Augustine Institute. Obviously, Mitch's Leonine Forum program is terrific. But to answer your question, Father, everything, and I think this is demonstrated again and again, depends on the pastor. The pastor has to be smart enough to read the current environment and has to have an energy that he brings to the work that attracts, acts as a magnet to other people. So I can't answer the question in terms of here's the model you should be using. I do know, and it is in fact proven by by CLI, that everything depends on the quality of the pastor. Whether you're poor or rich, multiracial, doesn't matter. If you have a pastor who's smart, motivated, and makes the people know that he loves them, the thing works. And then those issues of brick and mortar or deeply pious John Vianney kind of thing, they just fall into natural place. One of the things that Archbishop Chaput says in his long form interview at the end of the book is that both pastor and people have to develop more maturity in the way that they work together. The pastor is the head of the parish. He's dad, okay? But dad has to listen to his people in a way that doesn't abandon his authority, but also allows them to vent and be part of the action and make suggestions that are listened to. And that's not the model in the American church for a very long time, because we were a mission church under intense pressure from a culture that was hostile. And Father did everything. Father was on a pedestal. And that just doesn't work anymore. We have to do these things together and really recognize that we're equal, but we have different functions within the church. And again, somebody's got to be dad. It's the bishop and the pastor, but dad has to listen to his children and to his, the people who are in his under his leadership, under his pastorship. I'm wandering, George.
When I think of the really terrific parishes I know around the country, they are reflective of what Fran said. The pastor is a strong person of real deep faith, with a real vision of the parish as a platform for evangelizing the area. But every one of these men that I know is a great delegator. Who does not have to have his finger in every pie in the parish, and who knows he has permanent deacons for a certain reason, knows he has parish catechists for a certain reason, knows he has a school for a certain reason, sets a direction and a framework for that, but then lets competent people get on with being competent people. So I would say the greatest management skill a pastor needs today is the skill of prudent delegation after that large vision of, this is the body of Christ in this area, and we are meant to evangelize this area. During the plague, I did a Zoom talk with the seminarians at St. John Paul II Seminary over at Catholic University, which is a fine initiative here in Washington, a new college seminary about, 10 years old now, I think. And I said in the Q&A of that, I said, if you gentlemen do not understand that you are entering a missionary vocation, if you think you are simply going to be running a sacramental service station with a school attached to it, leave the seminary now. Mm-hmm. You will save yourself a lot of trouble, and you'll save the rest of us a lot of trouble. And the rector called me the next morning and said, thank you very much for saying that. So those are some things.
To build on what George just said, it reminded me of all the years that I worked for Chaput. If you were in a room with 30 strong-willed people with Chaput, you knew who exactly the boss was. I mean, there's never any question who was running the show. It was always Chaput, But he was a master at it, He really listened to everybody, And I saw him frequently adjust his thoughts based on the advice that he got. And if you were willing to work hard and you were honest in the way you worked, he gave you a huge amount of freedom of action in terms of accomplishing the mission. But he also followed up. And you never, you were never, I said this to him and he laughed. The day that I walked out the day that I left the building for the last time at the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, I told him it was the first time in 23 years when I was absolutely confident in my job, that I had a job the next day. And the reason for that was not because he was, he ever threatened me. We had a terrific relationship, but I always knew I had tasks to do and I better deliver them because sooner or later he was going to circle back. And that's a big problem in the church. Bishops don't like to close offices that are already dead, all right? They don't like to cut budgets that are overdrawn. They don't like to fire people because that's bad, right? It's just being a good shepherd in a pastor in a parish or in a diocese means killing things that don't work. And nobody wants to do that in the church, which is why in Philadelphia, when we got there, we had all sorts of political and legal problems. But we also, as an extra added bonus, had a $300 million debt, which somebody had forgotten to mention, So I'm overstating it there. But the issue is that we have to be responsible and in a sense, hard in terms of the way we.
And one reason it was that mess, I remember visiting Archbishop Chaput in Philly 3 months after he got there. He had aged 10 years in 3 months. And
it was a fun time.
We were reflecting upon the fact that in Denver, the archdiocesan offices were only 2 stories, and it was like a hub and spokes arrangement. Mm-hmm. Okay, he was the hub, and it was clear that he was the hub, but these were the. He said, I'm sitting on top of a 14-story tall building, 13 stories of which are dedicated to keeping me from doing what I need to do. And I said, well, sell the building. That was my suggestion. Blowing it up would probably be a bit too much.
But that goes back to
it is this, bureaucracy is a huge problem in the church today.
Yeah, and that's a reflection. That's a reflection of the fact that we became very, very successful in the United States, and then began to believe that we were kind of a permanent part of the furniture. And once that happens, you become tepid and slow and unproductive and unmissionary. And the people that you're leading, sooner or later, get tired of dealing with it and drift off because they're not motivated by something higher than getting ahead. The biggest curse in this, for Catholics in this country, the biggest blessing and a curse at the same time is that we assimilated so well. We did extraordinarily well as a religious minority. And then we just decided that we didn't need the church anymore in a lot of ways. And so where are we now? Re-evangelizing a culture that thinks it already knows everything about the gospel. That's incredibly difficult. It's much harder than going to Papua New Guinea and converting people who've never heard of Jesus Christ before. So what George said a couple of minutes ago about the quality of our seminaries, hang on to that, because they really are good men. The seminaries are better than they have ever been, certainly in the last 30 years. That's one big, big win that has huge long-term consequences, because these guys, sometimes they're immature, sometimes they're too focused on, kind of dead elements of the past that they want to incorporate in their ministry. But on the whole, they're really good men, really good committed men, and they're very savvy about what's going on in the country. So that's a source of hope. And the other thing too, we only have so much time to talk about this in prepared remarks, but there are just dozens and dozens and dozens of really great ministries going on out there with a lot of inventive young people who are trying to come up with ideas of, how do we spread the gospel? I profile Napa Legal Institute. I didn't profile Napa Institute because I already know everything about it. It does a great job, and I didn't need to do that. But Napa Legal is new, and Napa Legal is doing a very important job in terms of providing legal advice to Catholic and other religious nonprofits. Okay, then you've got Leonine Forum, which is doing a terrific job under Mitch's leadership in terms of forming the next generation of lay leaders and taking it very seriously. You know, Augustine Institute, Fellowship of Catholic University Students, fantastic organization. You know, Chris Stefanik, probably the best lay preacher that my generation has produced. So I mean, there's a lot of good stuff going on. And, you know, we've got an 800-pound gorilla in the middle of all this, which is called EWTN. You know, I mean, I almost ignored them because it's just so big. We've got literally hundreds of local Catholic radio stations that are spreading the word. And some are, you know, goofy. A lot are really good. And so you'll never hear about any of this stuff. You're never going to read about it in the National Catholic Reporter, you know, and you're certainly not going to read about it in the New York Times, but they don't really count in the long run. I mean, it's a long war, and we just have to get used to not being so important culturally. We have to earn that back, whatever influence is appropriate, by converting souls, and there's plenty of people who are doing that.
Thanks, George and Fran. Fran, maybe this is more for you. You talked about the assimilation of American Catholics as being a great blessing, but also one of our sort of biggest curses. We talk about all these great initiatives that are going on now, and you know, it's a long list that you two have come up with, and it could be even longer. Do you think it's the case, and if so, perhaps expound on what the significance of that is, that most Americans, even those who are aware of and involved in these great new initiatives, still see the goal as getting back to the acceptable normal of 50, 60, 70 years ago? I mean, what's the goal culturally? If we're in a culture war, what does victory look like? Does it mean that we're back to 1960 and 80% of Catholics vote for the same person to be a real Catholic president, or what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and I don't know if I can answer it properly. I certainly don't want to go back to the 1950s. You know, let's take the specific example of the Latin Mass. Okay, I grew up with the Latin Mass. I served in it for most of my youth and young, you know, adolescence. It can be beautiful. And I think it was a stupid thing on the part of the Vatican to try to suppress it, because all it does is create enemies, okay? It gives a rallying point to people who are angry. Having said that, it could be done just as stupidly and badly as the Novus Ordo. That's not the point, you know? We're not going to ever go back to the 1950s or 60s, nor should we ever, because that's the problem that we have now. That all came to fruit in where we are right now. So, I don't know. I mean, I think I just want to see people who are really excited about being a Catholic and smart about it at the same time. And that takes all sorts of different forms. You know I'm a dinosaur, for example. At 75, I know a whole lot of stuff.
You're too young to be president. What are you talking
about? Something to look forward to, yeah. But, you know, at 75, it's like I know a whole lot of stuff because I experienced all this stuff, you know? And what's my job? I was just talking about this with the guys earlier tonight. You know, it's their turn. It's your turn to be the same as me, how I grew up, and I don't want it to be the same because the same as me, how I grew up, and I don't want it to be the same because it got us into this jam in the first place. You know, so what do you think?
I agree that we do not know what a reformed culture would look like, because I'm not sure we've ever seen a degree of cultural decadence of the sort we're living through now before. So what would turning that around mean? I think what we do know now, and the book is a wonderful primer on that, is what reformed microcultures look like. Mm-hmm. You know, the good family, the good parish, the good school, the good Catholic healthcare center, the reformed microculture of a vibrant community of consecrated life, seminaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll see what the aggregate or the aggregation of those reformed microcultures comes up with. But I think that's where the emphasis on renewal needs to be now, on continuing to create those vibrant Catholic microcultures that can model for a culture that is really becoming lethal. I mean, it's becoming death dealing in a way that will not be we will not be able to deny much longer. Model an alternative to that, because what is going to turn things around, if they do get turned around, is going to be witness before argument. We're living in an age of sufficient irrationality that we're not going to argue our way out of this. Now, this is not easy for somebody who makes his living arguing to admit, but it's the case, and it's modeling authentic community and authentic expressions of human dignity that will attract people who will want to know, how can you live that way? And then the door is open for the evangelical proposal.
You know, if you listen to George, you really do understand why he's the distinguished senior fellow in Catholic studies. I'm the somewhat less distinguished senior fellow. That didn't fit on my business card. I mean, George has just done such an incredible job over many, many years. I mean, his books have been terrific. He's best known for his 2-volume thing on Wojtyła, and that, of course, is a brilliant book, and a lot of other things that he's done. My favorite book, and I say this every time I get an opportunity to say this, is what's the one on France again? The Key in the Cathedral. Man, that book it's for a little book. That is a genius piece of work. It just captures the moment that we were in and that we are in terms of the encounter of religion and modern secular culture. So I highly recommend that. After I recommend this, of course. Yeah, I mean, I just love the church. I love the fact that we're having this conversation because it's clear. I mean, for me, why am I here tonight? Well, I'm like the car salesman trying to push this book. I do think it's worth buying, by the way. But it's revivifying to me to just interact with people who kind of get it, who take it seriously, who want to do something about it and try to live the gospel. And again, that's why I come back to Dietrich Bonhoeffer all the time. I mean, that idea of the confessing church is so powerful for me because that's our job. I mean, the idea of confessor and martyr. Of course, confessor it comes from a Latin word. Martyr is, but they mean the same thing. I mean, the confitiere, I think, is the word that confessor comes from, and it means to witness. And martyr, of course, is the Greek for witness. Our job is to witness to Jesus Christ, to confess Jesus Christ. That's why Bonhoeffer has appealed to me. It's funny, he has a real impact on a lot of Catholics. I mean, Archbishop Sam Aquila in Denver is a huge fan of his, and Archbishop Shapiwo always did too. And that leads to the point that I really wanted to make here, which was, I think the genius of the Ethics and Public Policy Center is that it's not Catholic. It's religious in the sense that it understands the role of religion in public policy. But it's a place that draws together believing biblical Jews and Christians into an environment where they interact. And I think that's very much part of the future. I mean, I kid Carl Trueman, who's ordained Presbyterian minister and one of our colleagues, that I'm closer to him than I am to a lot of Catholics, because he actually believes, and we don't spend a whole lot of time arguing about, whether the Eucharist is one thing or another. We're all in the same boat of trying to live the gospel of Jesus Christ and extend belief in God as an insurance for a dignified and a free life. And you can only get that, frankly, in a strong way in a center like the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which George was president of for a while, and now Ryan is, and of course Mitch is also executive vice president. He's done a great job, kind of, just making the thing run better.
It just occurred to me when you were talking about why you did the book. You could do a mirror image negative of this in Germany right now. Talk to 103 well-placed German Catholics.
Yeah, that's about all there are, actually.
Except the book would not be called True Confessions. It would be called What the Hell Happened. But it would. I think it would draw out that what is the problem in those Catholic wastelands is a collapse of faith. I mean, I've been writing for 5 years now that the problem in Germany is not schism, it's apostasy. Mm-hmm. They've abandoned the faith once delivered to the saints, and all the rest of it follows in train. But that's the negative mirror image of this. It's here's what an apostate church looks like. It's dead. It's only kept alive because of government funding,
Which is
another reason why it's dead.
It's another reason it's dead. Getting too close to government is an extremely big mistake. And one of the bishops that I talked about was recounting one of the synods where one of the Africans got up and said, "I don't know if you gentlemen from the European and American churches are conscious of this yet, but Constantine is dead." And so is his model of the church. We just can't get too close to government without it. We always lose in those deals. We lost when we made the Concordat with Nazi Germany. It was less than 1 year before they began violating that on the other side. We've made this Concordat with China. It's just baffling. I mean, we have a record of that not working, and of course, there's already been problems with it. So. I mean, we're in a position where, I don't want to appear too negative about this, but I will anyway. When you have the very last thing we need in the Catholic Church at this moment is a movement to demasculinize her. We're in the middle of a crisis of fatherhood, a crisis of masculinity, and we have we have people in positions of leadership talking about the importance of demasculinizing. It's a crazy idea, And synodality done right is a valuable thing. But what is it? It's inward looking. I mean, George wrote a terrific book, well, more than one of them, just talking about the need for evangelization, a missionary Catholicism. And when we're looking inside the church, we're focused fundamentally on somehow fixing her. We're not doing the really important thing, which is just saying, Jesus Christ is Lord, and I believe in him, and here's why you might be interested in it too. I think the most difficult thing for me to deal with over the last 10 years is just the lack of evangelical zeal.
Fran and I have done 2 synods together.
Yep.
He's 2 behind me. I've done 4 of these things, which is...
No, I'm 1 behind you. I did 1997.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
You're still ahead, okay?
Yeah. I mean, it's 25,000 years off purgatory each time. But in the 2 we did together, I think we were both reminded many times of something that Father Richard John Newhouse of blessed memory used to say, which was that if you are unclear where you have landed post-mortem, if you hear a voice saying, "Please break down into small groups and discuss the following," you will know that you are in hell.
Okay, I'm going to end it there. Great place. Thanks.
George. Thank you.
Thanks again to all of you for joining us here tonight. A few housekeeping items as we end the night. Of course, you're all welcome to join us for a reception and book signing out in the bookstore. I kindly ask that you let Fran make his way over there to the signing table so we can have a chance to sign all of your books before he has time to leave. Fran, I'm going to make you sign right on the page where you sing the praises of Leonine, so you can't take it out in the next edition. Second, our next event here at the CIC is this Saturday morning. It's one of the quarterly family-friendly days that we do where we feature a book read by an author, do crafts activities, and have plenty of Chick-fil-A. We are celebrating St. Patrick's Day a little early this Saturday with a delightful new little book called The Richest Leprechaun in Ireland. It's written by a DC Leonine Fellow, Elise Daniels, and illustrated by a New York Leonine Fellow, Tara Wright. So if you have young kids, those are really fun days, so please come here for that. And then, of course, here at the CIC, please save the date for our second annual Eucharistic procession in our nation's capital on Saturday, May 18th. We close down the streets right out here on K Street all the way down to Lafayette Plaza. It's an incredible opportunity to bring our Lord into the heart of Washington and even closer to the White House than he is right now. And finally, the garage here is going to close at 8, so if you drove this evening, please make sure you get your keys and get down there before then. Thanks again to EPPC and to Napa Institute for co-sponsoring, to Fran and George, and to all of you. Thank you.